You hear the word boundaries all the time in recovery. They're obviously an important piece of staying emotionally and mentally healthy. But what does the word boundaries actually mean? How do you set a boundary? In this episode of Through the Glass Recovery podcast, you are going to hear from certified recovery coaches Jamie and Nele and Jessica, author of Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea, as they join us in a conversation about what boundaries have actually looked like in their lives. You'll hear real life examples and experiences that you can easily apply to your own life and that will give you the courage and strength to set boundaries of your own. If you're a people pleaser, and you put others' needs before your own in order to keep the peace, stay tuned because this episode is for you.
Welcome to Through the Glass Recovery podcast, where we believe that connection is the opposite of addiction, vulnerability is the antidote to shame, and that recovery isn't just rewarding, but it's also a lot of fun. We're your hosts, Steve and Julie. Listen as we get together with friends to shed light on the hard things, talk about the other side of addiction, and how we create a life so full, there's no space left for alcohol.
Boundaries are tough. You tend to doubt yourself, wondering if what you're doing is right or if you're being selfish. And if your boundary doesn't go over well, it can be really emotionally difficult. Having a recovery coach by your side when learning to set boundaries will make you a lot more confident. You can find information about one-on-one recovery coaching with Julie and Steve on our website at throughtheglassrecovery.com. Hello and welcome everybody to Through the Glass Recovery podcast. It is so nice to see everybody. We've got Jamie back for the first time in a long, long time. And then we've got a couple of ladies who haven't been here with us before. So I'm excited to get to know you guys and have a great conversation today. And I think it's a really important one. So I'm really looking forward to this. And I'm going to let Jamie start us off since she's returning. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Jamie?
Sure. My name's Jamie Woodall, and I'm just checking here. My sober time is I'm nearing 3 years, 8 months. Super happy about that. And I am living on a beautiful little island in British Columbia called Bowen. And I am the solo mom of 2 teens. Well, one is 20 and one is 17 now, but yeah, pretty much single parenting. And yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm also a trained recovery coach. Just recently celebrating one of my clients' 2 years. Is very exciting, yeah. And yeah, just love my sober life. Love sober parenting.
Absolutely.
Ooh, that's
Amen
that's
to that.
that's a good one. Your sober date is like 2 weeks from mine, I think.
We're super close.
We are super close because today's 45 months for me on the nose.
Oh, that's like metric and imperial. You have to the
Days and months.
I don't know what it is, but I think it's March 14th. Mine.
but I bet your sober math is better than your non-sober math.
My sober math is way better than my non-sober math. I don't know that I would be getting through accounting class the way I'm getting through it, and that's just addition and percentage.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, Jamie, it's really nice to see you again, and I'm so happy to have you. So thanks for being here. And Nele, do you want to go next?
Yes. Hello, I'm Nele Cashmore. I am a mom also of 2 young boys, 3 and 6, a wife, a full-time recovery coach. I work for a local nonprofit in Craig, Colorado. And my sobriety date is July 7th of 2019. So I'm not mathing either, but a little over 5 years. Um, I also really love sober parenting. I'm also a child of alcoholics. So providing this life for my kids has been a dream. And my husband is currently practicing like controlled drinking. So I think it's funny that I loved that you asked me for this topic of boundaries because I'm like a poster child for that right now.
This sounds very boundary-ish.
Yeah.
It's good. Juicy. And I love my job. We live in a really small town, and it's such a beautiful thing. Like, I was one of the first recovery coaches here. It's a really, really beautiful thing to watch it grow in our community and to be a part of. And I am grateful every single day that I'm sober today and that I get to do all the things that I just mentioned, including being here. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for being here. Steve and I have mentioned a couple of times now the peer recovery conference that we went to this summer, and that's actually where we met Nele. You put that whole thing together, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. That was incredible. That was the first time we had done a conference of any kind. And so
Mm.
that was just an incredible experience for us. We really enjoyed it. So
Oh, I set the bar high for y'all.
you did. It was great. So yeah, really grateful that
Yep.
that we got to go there and meet you and now we get to hang out here with you. So really cool.
Yes. Thank
Awesome. Yeah. And the last but not least is Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Guerreri. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for asking me to come on. I am the proud mother of 3 young daughters. I have a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And I have a recovery date of May 2nd, 2013. So I celebrated 11 years of continued sobriety. I also consider myself an addict as well, and I have a separate addict date of August 7th, 2021. I learned during the pandemic that it turns out I cannot do any substance safely. And I also learned as I was writing my debut fiction novel, which is loosely based on my experience in sobriety and motherhood, called Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea. It is being published by HarperCollins, and it will be available everywhere May 13th of next year. It's available for pre-order, and I absolutely stand by what everybody had to say about sober parenting. It does actually make everything easier, even though motherhood in a nutshell is not easy. I wanted to write an honest take on what it's like in the slippery slope of when you fall down that rabbit hole of mommy wine culture and what it looks like in reality. And so mine is a firsthand, first person account of that. And it's very honest. And I'm hopeful that it will resonate with a lot of people and also make people feel less alone. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Make sure you include a link to that pre-order. We'll make sure our listeners get that. That sounds like something that so many of us will be able to relate to. I know mommy wine culture is absolutely what sucked me in. And I think so many women can say the same thing. It is just, it's insidious for sure. So,
right.
yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to read your book. That sounds amazing. So, yeah, diving into our topic. Boundaries is a popular buzzword in both mental health and recovery circles, but understanding them can sometimes be confusing. One of the most helpful ways to understand boundaries is to hear examples of what that has looked like for other people. So we would love it if you could share some examples of what boundaries have looked like in your life and also how things have worked out since you started setting them. What's been helpful? What's been hard? Kind of a broad topic, I think, but boundaries, they're so hard for people to grasp and understand. And the very best thing we can do is just get example after example after example out there. So we have covered boundaries before, and every new voice to this topic, I think, is really important. So
So
anybody's welcome to jump in.
no one's
Can I jump in with
Yeah.
what before I got into recovery, boundaries weren't a part of my vocabulary. So it was a line on a soccer field, right? And so when I heard that, I was like, okay, this perfect example of something being contained, like within a solid line, right? As I've grown in recovery, it looked a lot more like what are my no's? What's my hard no? What is important to me? What is sacred to me? And what am I willing to or not willing to bend on? So And I think as a parent, as a wife, as an employee, sometimes those boundaries that get pushed constantly, right? So I just thought this was a lovely topic for me to contribute to because it's a practice for me. It really is. I think I learned how to say no to things as I got to know myself because I really didn't have any guideline, any boundary when I was drinking. And I think back on those times and really I said yes to most things, thinking that I could handle it or I could, I was enjoying it at the time. So now, as I learned from a lot of the people that came before me in recovery, I watched what they were doing, right? Like, oh, they changed their circle of friends. They started saying no to going out, going to parties, going to the liquor store. That's where it started for me. Now it's more of like an emotional, what do I want to let in and what am I saying no to? And that comes in many different forms. And I'm grateful that I think one of the key takeaways for me was that I didn't learn how to do those things on my own. I learned it from watching people in recovery and listening to what they were doing. And, you know, I sought the support of 12-step groups and also some outside help with therapy and continue to do those things. And I have a coach of my own now too. I think that helps because like I said, it's a practice. But I wanted to talk about that too, just like that was not a word in my vocabulary
Absolutely.
growing up. Yeah.
You kind of have to like start learning how to be okay with disappointing people, right? For me, that was like the worst feeling ever. I needed everybody to be pleased and happy with me because that's where I got like all my self-worth. So I would hustle and I would say yes to everything so that I could try to feel good about myself, which never actually worked. But setting boundaries generally means you're going to disappoint someone. They're not going to get what they wanted. And you have to learn how to just be okay with that. For so long, I felt like everybody else was more important than me. Everybody else's feelings were more important than mine. And to flip that script and make me as important or even more important than what other people's feelings are in certain situations was really hard, but also like really, really necessary.
Mm. Yeah, I like what you said about having to disappoint people. It's interesting because in motherhood, so we're taught that, our children before everything, right? And so in recovery, we're taught that actually our recovery comes before everything. And so having to learn that and then actually accept that that's true and then have everybody in your life understand it in the point like everyone in this room understands it because you're in recovery with me. But if I say that to a regular person and they're just like, what do you mean like something comes before your children? Like what a selfish mother are you? Actually, not really, because I don't have anything without my recovery, right? So that it means nothing. But it's such a hard hat to wear because you're like, well, I'm supposed to do all these things for my children. I don't want to disappoint anyone, as you said. And it's like, you are going to, absolutely, especially when it's like, well, I'm sorry, I have a meeting I have to go to. I have a commitment that I made to my recovery. And it's how I stay sober. And then this is how I show up for you. And so that boundary can be offensive to a lot of people that don't understand. And that's on them. That's a them problem, as I like to say, because we're trying so desperately to control people, places, and things. And I'm like, at the end of the day, I have control over what's in my hula hoop and what's in my bubble. And I'm only able to do that when I set those boundaries and say, sorry, but my recovery becomes before everything else. So I can show up as the person that you need and that you love.
Yeah, I'd like to add that those are they're amazing points, and all of that has just actually really resonated with me. I heard the term once that I'm a recovering people pleaser, and what you were saying, Julie, is and on many conversations you've said things that have really resonated with me, and I think that the flip side of people pleasing or another aspect of it is that internally, in some way, you eventually build resentment. And you guys heard of the different love languages?
Mhm.
Well, one of my love languages is being of service. That's how I show love, is to be of service. So it's a really delicate balance because my cup is truly filled by being of service to other people. But something that I've learned in recovery is that I have to constantly be checking in to make sure that there is balance. Because at some point, I'm a solo mom of two. I say solo because my ex lives in another country, so we don't share the kids. I'm 100% with the kids, but I'm also the daughter of an 86 and an 89-year-old who live 2 blocks down, and they're both they're both the only children. So I'm really in this kind of sandwich generation, and I've got a lot of places I can give, and I love it. I really do thrive off of it, and it is part of my spiritual practice as well to be of service. But yeah, at some point, if you are not feeding your own needs and expressing your own boundaries, and those are not even boundaries with other people, those are boundaries with myself, which could be another big part of this conversation. There's boundaries with yourself. And I need to carve out that walk in the forest, or I need to, and it's not selfish. It is, exactly as you were saying about, going to the meeting instead of, or prioritizing the meeting, Jessica, that, yeah, sometimes we just really need to set that boundary, prioritize what we need in order to fully be of service to other people and show up as our best selves without resentment.
So after the mess of trying to figure out how to communicate a boundary, because at the beginning I didn't know the words. They weren't there. I tried. It was a messy version of a conversation is what it turned out to be. But if you don't start trying, if I didn't start trying, I wouldn't actually recognize what they would look like. But I felt like a dick. I felt like an ass. Julie, you talk about the disappointment, like you feel like you're disappointing people. I didn't feel like I was disappointing people. I felt like I was being an asshole, right?
Mm.
By saying no, by not participating. Because that's kind of what it felt like I'm not going to participate in this thing that you're doing. And then so I'm going to now remove myself from the thing that you're doing so I can maintain my own sense of peace. And at the beginning, I didn't realize that it was the peace that I was trying to protect. But in the end, that's exactly what I was doing, was I was protecting my own peace based on somebody else's actions. Like, that is, Jessica, you said it, that's a them problem. You're trying to make it my problem, and yes, I have to do something about it. And I think one of the main things that was a confusing thing for me was a boundary wasn't like me asking Julie to stop doing that thing, right? Julie, can you stop calling me that name? That's not a boundary. That's just me asking you to stop calling me that name. A
It's a
boundary
request.
right. It's a request. A boundary is an action that I'm going to take based on your action. And it was up to me to communicate that to people that I loved and cared for. So it was up to me to communicate to to my wife at the time, or my parents, or people that I held in really high regard. And in that case, those are people that I held in higher regard than I did myself. Because near the beginning, I still felt really small. I hadn't humanized other people yet. I was still small and I was still tiny. So to grow a voice felt like growing a backbone. Growing a backbone felt like being an asshole. And when all of you started talking about setting the boundary is selfish, that form of it's a form of self-love. It's me honoring myself. And it was back then I couldn't put words to that. I couldn't say that, you know what, I'm going to say no to you because this is in honor of me and this is how I'm going to show myself love. This is authentic to Steve. And then my fear is the consequence of it. I'm going to set this boundary. I'm going to piss this person off. And then somebody's going to want to get me back because that's what goes through my mind. Like, what is the effect of it? You know what I mean? Like, where's the recourse? Because that's what it feels like. That's what it felt like. Where's the recourse? Like I punch you in the arm, then you punch me in the arm harder, then I punch you in the arm harder, and then we punch buggy real punch back.
Hmm.
If anyone's old enough, then they would get.
And Canadian. I think you just told us the Canadian version of
You're welcome.
I got it.
Boundaries take so much courage because you don't know how the other person is going to respond, and you have to be okay with not being able to control that. The one boundary that I said that has been the very hardest out of all of them, I was maybe 6 months sober, 8 months sober, so pretty brand new to this whole way of living. And my oldest child was 19 or 20, living at home, treating me with all kinds of disrespect, treating our home disrespectfully, like messy bedroom, puking out into the hallway. And like my requests were really small, like, please treat me with some amount of respect. Please control your mess to just your bedroom. Like it wasn't excessive. The things that I was asking for, but it never those things that I was asking for never happened. And so I lived in this constant state of resentment. Like you guys were talking about, I felt like I was mad every time I walked out of my room, every time I walked down the hallway, every time I was in the kitchen and they came in and, you know, said snarky things or whatever it was, just hurtful, right? And so my whole life was this ball of resentment and angst and drama and fear and all of the yucky things. And so and I was trying to stay sober in that too, which we all know at 6 or 8 months sober, that's tough to do. And so I was like, okay, I have to do something here. And this is where, I'd made the request. I need you to stop leaving your messes everywhere. I need you to stop treating me disrespectfully. And that didn't happen. So then it had to turn into, what action am I going to take? And that ended up being, if you can't do these things I'm asking for, then I'm going to ask you to move out. And I honestly, with all my heart, thought that that was going to be the thing where they started cleaning up. They started being polite, whatever. That's not how it went. They straight up moved out. And my heart was shattered. Like, so there is a consequence to asking or to setting a boundary, and it can be really painful when it doesn't go the way that you want it to go. I can also say that my home is peaceful now. And that's hard, and it's weighing one and the other, right? My mama heart is broken because I would love for my kiddo to still be here, especially knowing the situation that they're currently in. However, my home is peaceful, and I can walk out my bedroom door and not feel all of that anger and resentment bubbling up inside of me. So it's tough, and I guess I hate to use kind of a sad example of a boundary, but I also think it's important to understand that even if the result is painful, we still have to honor ourselves. And even when when we do honor ourselves, that's where we build some self-worth. That's how we learn how to trust ourselves. That's how we learn and grow so much. But boundaries can be really hard. I think when we describe boundaries, we're like, so you say this, and then you decide you're going to do this, and then the person accepts your boundary, and like it doesn't work magically like that. A lot of the time, and especially with the people we love the most, it's not as magical as it sounds on an Instagram post.
Your boundaries create conflict, doesn't it? Not all the time. Not all the time, but it definitely can create conflict.
I think I've heard this before as well. Like, I think it happened when I got sober too. Like, I made a decision to get sober, and then I relapsed, but then I made the decision again. So that decision gets made once, even though we practice that a few different times. But the difference is, I think, with the boundary is that we take an action. We take an action on it. We actually do something to protect our peace or protect our home or our emotional sobriety, whatever it is. I heard that the other day and it really stuck with me. It's like, oh, I made the decision over and over again, even though it was the same decision. I didn't take action on it until I said, this is a boundary and this is the end, That was an interesting thought. And it happened when I got sober too, because I relapsed a few different times too. I'm sorry, Jamie, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's fine. No, that was great. Thank you. No, I was just thinking about it was a quote or something that I read that setting boundaries teaches or shows people how to love you, and sort of what Steve was saying about, the of yes, it states what you don't want. It also kind of defines everything else that is welcome,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
And Julie, at the beginning you were asking for examples, and I'm thinking about communications with my ex. And like here's it's a really simple little boundary that I set, but he used to write something to me and I would get totally triggered, and I would immediately he's in Bali. We used to live in Bali, and it's a time change. He's probably the middle of the night for him, and I'm just like I'm typing, and all of the everything that if I'd given it 12 hours wouldn't have come out like that.
Hmm.
It didn't center. I didn't, and that was the source of so much uh s- pain for me, for him, you know, whatever it is, however close you keep it, it always trickles down to the kids in some way or another. So that was one of my big boundaries just for myself. When you get a communication like that, stop. You're giving 12 hours. You're not going to respond. You're not even going to open it. And or glance at it and close it. Breathe, all the things. Whatever your resources are to sort of ground, come back, maybe journal around it. Whatever it was, it depends on what it is, but my communication has really really improved since I set that one sort of rule for myself
Mhm.
is I'm not going to respond like that. And it has shown by me, because I would always send back stuff that made me feel terrible, made me feel like I wasn't self-controlled, went back into that whole cycle of, he thinks I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. Look at how I just communicated. He made me communicate like that, like the whole thing. So this sort of refills, my sense of self-worth because I'm communicating from a centered, strong, grounded place. I'm articulate. I don't respond to the stuff that I know is meant to trigger me, but I'm answering things that need to be answered about the kids. And that boundary has really, really served me. And I would say it has definitely improved our relationship as co-parents on different continents, which is always challenging just to start with.
Right.
One of the things I had to learn the hard way with boundaries was so during the pandemic, like I shared, I discovered that I can't do any substances safely. But what was happening was I was feeling so triggered by my isolation. And so all the things that they say not to do, right, as a person in recovery. I'm sure you guys have talked about at length. We had to do in the pandemic, right? Like all of my meetings moved online, and then my world got really, really small. And I was also in charge of 3 humans that were 5 and 3 and 18 months. And I learned that I was just so deeply, deeply unhappy and wanted to escape and was trying to find my safest form of escapism, which was other forms of alcohol. And so I ended up needing to discover that, you know, it turns out motherhood actually isn't the thing that I'm best at. I was always taught that like women equals you have children, this is what you do, this is what you're supposed to do. And before this, I was a special education teacher, so I have patience for days. And then I had my own daughters, and it was like, huh, where did my patience go? Like, what? What's happening? And it just ended up being that it turns out like my role as a stay-at-home mom wasn't what was best for our family because it wasn't what was conducive to my sobriety. It wasn't what was conducive to my best self. And therefore, I wasn't showing up for my children in the way that I needed to. And so this is actually when I wrote my book is during the pandemic. And I decided that, this was going to be my safest form of escapism was writing after I got sober and clean. And so I decided to use that as a tool and say, I'm gonna explore this. But what I had to do is I had to show my daughters that it was okay, that I was not what I thought that I was going to be, or that I wasn't the best at it. And I had to show them that, this is the stumbling block. This is the journey that I was on. And so they ended up like coming along for the ride with me and like watching the fall and then watching me come back, even though, they were young at the time, but now that as they've gotten older. And so, they just, if I always joke, like if they could crawl back up inside me, they would. Like they just love me so, so much. And I feel so blessed for that. And of course I love them. But I also know that my love for them needs to be not all encompassing for my recovery. And so while they would like want me all the time and want me to continue to be their primary everything, their sun, moon, and stars, I'm showing them that I'm actually doing other things. And like that is a form of a boundary for me, is to say, like, you, of course, are a priority for me, but this is also really important. And look, and one of the greatest, moments in my life is when I signed my 2-book deal, and it was like my daughters were there, like for the call, and my oldest comes up to me and she goes, "Mommy, you're living your dream. You're living your dream."
Amazing.
And I just thought, there's nothing better that I could teach them, that this is what I'm supposed to do with that. And that's my hope. Like that is what I've created in that, even though it doesn't look the way that I thought it would, and I'm not that mom that I thought that I was going to be. I'm not Mary Poppins. I'm not all of those things. I'm actually better as something else, and it's better for them to see that too and reflect it, especially as women, if they choose to have a family and choose to, that they can be a mom, and that's important.
We talk
Mhm.
about boundaries too. It's our responsibility to teach other people how to treat us. And with a boundary, because I'm taking an action, that's a way in which I can do that. And some of them come across really subtly, just like a no, I can't do that. And then they carry on. But learning how to not take responsibility for somebody else's reaction was something that I really had to look at, because I took it personally. I took what other people said personally. I took what other people did personally. Like it was all about me, and it had nothing to do with me. But I was, I had a curiosity in LA because you talked about your husband controlling his drinking, and how that there's some boundaries that maybe you've had to set. And I think maybe there's a bunch of people out there that might be able to relate to what you're going through, and maybe not what you're going through. I don't want to say it that way. What you're experiencing.
Yeah,
So
right.
I'm curious.
Okay, so I'm gonna preface this by saying I love my husband.
Mhm.
He's my best friend. And him and I got together in sobriety. So this is a new journey. And I think for what he's trying to accomplish, he's done a great job trying to manage controlled drinking. And for him, that looks like maybe a drink every few days, maybe a couple drinks a week. So I'll preface it with that. Now, I have seen him in really bad place before. We have relapsed together and gone way off the deep end, both of us, and came back from that. And, both got into recovery and did well for a while with the abstinence thing. So I think I need to talk mostly from what I experienced with it. All of the boundaries that I tried to lay down have been crossed, right? So no drinking or using at the house, or no alcohol and drugs in the house. That has been crossed. And then there's, the fear of drinking or using and driving, which hasn't really happened that often. So I'm grateful for that. And then there's the really obvious one that is like, if you want to get drunk, like if you really want to get fucked up, it's not going to happen here. Take it somewhere else. And, that doesn't happen very often. It's happened like once probably or twice at this house that we live in together. But it happens. So this topic of boundaries comes up for me a lot because what happens, Jamie, is that the resentment takes over when I'm not fully accepting what we've talked about and agreed upon with his pathway. What happens when I'm not accepting all of that, all of those parts of him and what comes along with that, and I'm meeting it with frustration, fear, anger, sadness. It's, we're not in a good spot. And what I'll say is we have amazing communication. Like we check in almost every night. And by check in, it's like, how is your soul? Like, how are you today? How is your soul? And we've done that since we got together. And so I love that. We still have held on to that. And um what I've learned is that I can still have the boundary of not wanting to be around somebody who might be a little tipsy, might be a little bit drunk. I can still have that and love my husband and think that this can work, and think that this um can be manageable, right? So long as we continue to have open communication, that things aren't aggressive and too crazy, which they're not, as long as some of my end of the bargain is upheld, I think that this will be okay. And I have to have faith. I have to have faith in my marriage. I have to have faith that my higher powers got me and that if and when I had to make a really hard decision, that I can do that, right? Like I can do that. I don't want to sound indifferent because I love my husband so much, right? But I would never want to put my children in a position that I feel like I was put in as a kid and many other children get put into. And that's just like that's the hard boundary for me. So that's where I think we're at with I guess his behavior sometimes. I think he's gonna start kind of looking into this like drink less program, which is awesome. There's some harm reduction stuff out there and he's gonna look into this. So I think that's good because it's gonna be paired with some psych services and some support outside of me, right? The Maggie wife.
Nele, can I ask you a question? Not to like put you on the spot, but I would just love like to sort of get your take on this. You mentioned that the boundary has been crossed. Like you said it and it's been crossed. Like so what happens once it's been crossed? Does it get moved farther out? And I'm asking not to put you on the spot because we all relate to that, right? It's like Julie said, like she did the hard thing and it was like, sorry, you're moving out. Like this is what's happening. I'm curious,
Yeah.
like, so because what do we do when the boundary is crossed? Like what is the hard line? And then what happens, right? 'Cause I mean, I think that is the nature of this conversation is that is the hardest thing. And
I
then
think that's
what do we do?
Yeah, I think people are looking for that right or wrong answer. Do I get a divorce? Do I split the home up?
Right.
Or what I do is focus more on myself, my health, my well-being, I focus less on what he's doing and more on what I can pack into the stream of life.
Okay.
And that is my antidote. How can I be of service today? How can I help somebody else today? If especially if like nothing else is working and the sound is too loud. Like I love Jamie's talked about journaling. I do all those things often. Journaling, mindfulness, meditation, yoga every morning. I have like 30 to 45 minutes where I just take to myself every morning. I have done that my entire recovery. And that's what I mean. I think those are decisions we'll have to make if and when we have to cross that path. And I think what I would say for listeners is that, everybody has a unique situation. The fact that my husband and I can communicate and come together and show each other love and compassion is one thing. If we were tearing each other down, turning our backs to each other, if there was really not an ability to communicate even, that would be another story. And everybody has their own situations where their unique situations where they're gonna have to navigate those situations. For me right now, I think that, uh, this is manageable. I think that my kids aren't we're not harmed. My kids are not harmed. That, it's on there. It's on the table that if it were to start affect them, and, it does sort of affect my mental health and my spirituality, but I'm working on it not affecting that so much. I think those are gonna be the times when I start to say, this is affecting us in a negative way, and we need to figure out how to move forward from here. And I think that that's unique and individual to every family and every partnership.
It's gonna be
And
like that in any relationship, I think.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm listening to you talk, and I think it's really important to understand that boundaries are not all or nothing. Boundaries aren't, this is my boundary. If you cross it, I'm cutting you off. You're leaving my life. We're never going to speak again. Right. And I think a lot of time,
You're canceled.
it's, yeah. And that's like boundaries for the people we love that we're closest to. They
Mhm.
can't work like that. And the situation that I described, I think, was really severe. And also, neither one of us, me or my child, had the emotional maturity to handle that situation any better at the time. But, um, when it's somebody we've spent so much time with and we have a years and years and years long relationship with, or like our parents or somebody like that, we can set a boundary. And if they cross the boundary, we can take a break. We can say, okay,
Mhm.
this isn't working for me right now. I need to step back and regroup for a while. And then maybe we'll come back to this. The other thing is when a boundary is crossed, that's a disconnect in the relationship, right? That's a disconnection happens where people feel hurt. The coolest thing about a disconnection in a relationship is that if you can come back and reconnect, the relationship actually gets stronger. And Brene Brown actually talks about that, and it hit me so hard to hear that. A disconnect in a relationship isn't a terrible thing. That's normal. Any relationship that you have that has any substance and value to you, disconnects are gonna happen. Somebody's feelings are gonna get hurt. Somebody's not gonna feel heard. Whatever it is, somebody's boundary is gonna get crossed. And that's a disconnect. But you can come back and reconnect after that. You can have the conversation that's really hard and uncomfortable to have. And then you can choose to move forward. You can restate the boundary. They can state that they agree it. You can try again. And those relationships, like Steve said, we have to treat people how to treat us. If we've spent the last 40 years treating somebody how to treat us, we don't just like snap our fingers and suddenly they're like, "Oh, you're different now." Okay. Like it takes years and years and years of reteaching that for those really long relationships. So, Nale, what you're saying makes total sense. And I mean, it sounds like you two have an incredible relationship. The way you talk about like how is your soul? That's like that gave me chills to hear, but it's perfect. And that shows there can be a breakdown, there can be a disconnect and you can come back and you're both still going to hear each other and reconnect afterwards. So I think that's an important thing to understand about boundaries. It's not all or nothing. It leaves space for continued growth in the relationship if both people allow that to happen.
I will
Well,
say one last thing. I have to really lean on my support people, my family, his family, everybody that knows about us knows what's going on. And my sister and my brother, like my parents, they know I'm also by default a habitual deserter of relationships. Like cheater and like I've historically terrible in a relationship to my partners. And I've my sister brought some really great coaching to me and was just like, this is your marriage. And sometimes you're gonna be like the 90% partner, you know? And sometimes he's gonna, like there's been times where he's had to be the 90% partner. So there's lots of things that come into factor that really support our relationship. That's why I say I think everybody's situation's very unique and individual. I would not stay in a situation that was abusive or harmful. It would
I
definitely
hope
be a hard no.
our listeners, when they hear you speak about this, remove judgment and just listen to how you're speaking and the level of compassion that you have. And I'm probably just going to wrap this up here, but listen to how Nele is approaching this. And I'm not saying that everything is supposed to be that way, because there is a limit. There always is, one way or another. Boundaries are going to be crossed pretty much every day of your life, depending on, your job, your relationships. Julie, you talked about conflict, essentially, the disconnect, and then reconnection, strengthening the relationship. But Nele, I really want to thank you for sharing the situation. And I know I can feel your words and the little dance that you're trying to make to be careful about what you say. And of course, but your vulnerability here is something that I really appreciate. And I hope that our listeners really appreciate that too, because you brought some real life today situation to a podcast and to a bunch of listeners that I hope they find something valuable. And I'm not just trying to like discredit Jamie and Jessica too, because I really appreciate everything both of y'all shared as well. And listen to me, Julie, I just yawled.
Yes.
I'm the Canadian that's getting Americanized slowly on the Western slope.
Jessica's like,
yo, kill one. Um, really, I want to say thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Jamie. You guys were great. I appreciate your time and I appreciate your vulnerability too. So appreciate you guys being on here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, thanks to our listeners as well. We wouldn't be here without you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review or sharing it with a friend. The best way to get this podcast into the hands of more people that need it. Thank you. Again, we'll be back again next week.